and coverage on the APIs aspect. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about remote server signing v2 version 2, which is essentially based on challenge response based authentication and server signing. uh, Essentially it's a platform which can be deployed on premise. It gives us the legal digital signing as per the law, or I would say digital act, in context of Malaysia. It's going to have a very simplified user experience, and eventually it's looked upon as how we can reduce the cost and the effort. And then lastly, it has to be best of the security, so the next generation attacks can be prevented or mitigated. Essentially, it's using the PKI standards. It's not proprietary. It's open. It enforces non-repudiation. It's legal. It's not expensive. Simple reason being it's not driven via hardware tokens or very logistic-driven approach. And thirdly, it defeats a man in the middle or script in the middle form of attacks, which are essentially happening today. And then on the other hand is it does not depend upon the operating system, so it could be web or it could be mobile, it could be Linux or it could be Macintosh or Windows, and it still works fine. And lastly, it's a security which actually runs in the background, giving extremely easy user experience, and yet provide a strong authentication mechanism. So this is how it looks like. So we're going to have challenge response, we're going to have end-to-end encryption, unique transaction based authentication or code, and then we're also going to have timestamping with mutual authentication. So it's actually 4 different forms of authentication packed as one. And how it's going to change is that the hardware tokens are going to go away. So whatever was used previously, which could be a PKI token or hardware token, is going to go away. And then what is going to come in is it's going to have username and login at the time of entry. And then after that, we're going to have a challenge response plus plus. That's where a lot of security is working in the background, and eventually it's going to also use the certificate for actually enforcing non-repudiation. So it can be enforced at the time of login as well as at the time of transaction. It's up to the choice of the workflow or the business owner how they would like to use it. Now let's quickly go through the detailed APIs which are actually needed for this integration to be done. Every API is ready. It's available as a secure web service calls, and it's quite straightforward for any .NET or any Java or any other platform application to be used in a heterogeneous environment. It can be used in a 3-tier or it can be used in a single-tier environment. It's based on the application or the business owner. Now the first API is what we call it as open session. Open session actually allows you to make a connection to the authentication system to make sure that it's the right authentic party which is actually going to initiate the transaction or initiate the the request for authentication. Then corresponding to that is what we have as close, where the session gets gracefully closed. So if you don't close the session, automatically it will auto time out, which can be defined by the business owner or by the system administrator. This is a simple call essentially to get the user from the system, and this essentially just tells you, using your ID, your corporate ID, or using the phone number, you can actually identify the user, and it actually gives you back a user ID, which is what gets used in the consecutive APIs to be used. This API is user registered, is essentially for finding out whether the user is available for or is already being assigned challenge response. So if you actually ask with a value equal to 5, which is the third parameter, you can actually find out whether the user is registered or not. If the user is not registered, that is where the next API comes in, which is essentially get questions for registration. Over there, a random set of questions will be picked up from the question bank, which we'll talk about later in the part 2, and they can actually give you back the list of random questions that need to be asked to the user. After that, once the user is being asked these questions, then these answers needs to be registered with the authentication platform, and in the background a certificate will be generated for this particular user belonging to a particular organization. So essentially it's going to take a structure which will have the question answers, as well as a check whether it's case sensitive or not, and then that's how we're going to respond to it. Following to this, whenever the user is going to log in or whenever you want the user to authorize their transactions, a simple API gets called, a web service API gets called, which is get question for validation, which is where we input the user ID, and then in response to that we get the questions that needs to be answered by the user. the system will only give back the questions which are active. I'll talk about active and inactive later, or suspended later, but please note that only active questions will be asked to the user. In response to that, user will reply, and these answers will be matched based on the scorecard of the passing marks, which could be 80 out of 100 or 100 out of 100 or 50 out of 100, defined by the business owner. The transaction will be approved or transaction will be rejected. So there's quite a bit of parameters over here. We will not go into details, but we'll just essentially look at the top level API, which is validate user answers and sign the transaction using remote server signing. I'll be skipping these slides and actually going to a demo. So thank you over here, and let's quickly have a look at the demo part. So this is where we are actually logging in. So we log into the system, which is where the administrator is logging in. So what I'm going to show you over here, the entry point is essentially the question and answers. So over here we have all the users whom we can list it out. So I'll just take a simple example of a user, which is essentially user, which is myself, Vikram Sareen, and then we actually have this thing. Now what I would like to show you over here is the questions. Now these are the list of questions which are already in the system. So you can always come and actually add a new question, which is quite straightforward. So what is your favorite movie of all time? So it's as simple as an administrator to add a new question. Now you can assign a weightage. Weightage, essentially the concept is that each question with regards to its answer has a value or has a weight. Now that weight can range from 1 all the way to 10. 10 obviously being the maximum score. So you say, okay, I would like to give a weight of 8 out of 10. And then as administrator, you can also assign whether it's active or inactive. So over here I say, okay, it's active. Quite a straightforward flow. I add these questions. Now as you can see that this is being added, so there are a few previous questions which are already being added over here, and then you can also manage these questions. Let's say if you want to change the wordings or alphabet or just simple a question mark or something, and also if you would like to change the weightage or if you like to change the status. So over here what we are doing is that once you set these questions are essentially available for the users to be registered. So for example, I have another user which is Manoj, and he needs to have his questions assigned. So he's already assigned user, and this is where we have the list of questions which are assigned or which are being answered by Manoj and are available for doing the authentication. Now on the other aspect is a very quick look at what kind of reports will come in. So let's say I'm looking at a user, okay, let's say myself, I've done a transaction yesterday. So over here I can actually see this unique ID, which is the transaction ID or the archive ID, and what type of transaction was done. And over here I can actually see what data was signed by me using the web services, and also I can look at the signature of how it was done. So this is a very simple data which was signed, and then also what was the signature. So this is basically a detached signature, raw signature, which is being signed by me. And if you look at it, the score is 50 out of 50. That means that all the answers which were given were correct and valid. And let's try to look at another user. If he has, okay, sadly it doesn't have any information. So okay, this is a very quick overview of what we can do with regards to remote server signing using challenge response, and I'll be quickly covering a sample program of challenge response in a short while in the tutorial number 2.